A pleasure and a privilege to be here. It really is a pleasure and a privilege to be here. Thank you very much indeed, all of those of you who are associated with this great organisation for the work you do. I know that as a parish priest, I am hugely grateful that there are people who put a very different voice out there to the one that's often reported in the media. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a confession to make. I'm a member of an organisation of which I am not especially proud. You've got it, short hair, overweight. I'm a Chelsea fan. And as a Chelsea fan, I regularly am on the terraces listening to some pretty disgraceful comments by people who are standing alongside me. Racist and homophobic abuse. And I think actually at Chelsea it's particularly bad. Last week, two men were convicted of slagging off Sol Campbell from the terraces with homophobic chanting and abuse. They were Tottenham fans, and I quite understand that's the sort of thing you get from Tottenham fans, but and I was just reflecting as I was coming over here what the difference was between the sort of disgusting racist and homophobic abuse that you get from the terraces and the sort of homophobic language that you get from the pulpit sometimes. And the answer to the question is nothing at all. Nothing at all. One of the things that people are trying to persuade us all of is that religious homophobia is somehow a matter of principle for people, that it's somehow very different from the sort of deep and visceral bigotry that you get from the terraces. What I'm up here to say is something very, very simple from someone who sees it all the time, up close and personal. There is no difference. Those of you who are perhaps not members of churches, please do not be persuaded that there's anything special or different, anything more about conviction with homophobia that comes from churches. It is exactly the same. We're very lucky that Marilyn Adams is here, and she's going to be talking theologically about that this afternoon, and I'm going to leave the theological stuff to her, but I'm going to simply say that just to insist to people that they see no difference. Earlier last year, the Bishop of New Hampshire came to preach at my church in Putney, and this was, as many of you will know, a bishop who's a bona fide bishop in the Anglican communion who was banned from a meeting of the worldwide bishops in the Anglican communion simply because he is gay. He came and preached at my church, and in the middle of his sermon a gentleman stood up and railed against him in just the sort of way that people rail against people on the football terraces. It is outrageous, the behaviour of churches. It is prejudice, pure and simple. Which brings me to the Equality Bill and why I am so grateful that the government is bringing this in and how important it is. And yet there are those people in the churches who will rail against it. Listen to this rubbish from the Church of England newspaper. The government had better start building more prison space for Christians and moral conservatives generally. This is an editorial in the Church of England newspaper the other week. A time of persecution is at hand. And if you look at what the Church of England themselves, the official body of the Church of England, has said in response to the Equality Bill, it's actually not much better. The first two objections, maybe objections is not a very Anglican word, suggestions, two of them. Listen, I'm going to read this. This is C of E speak. So 2 sentences. I'm sorry if they're very dull sentences, but I want to just say what they've said. Religious organisations working in the public sector may be required by the new duties to act against their ethos. They may be required to act against their ethos. And then, more weasel words, room for religious difference in a diverse society must be protected, i.e. prejudice must be protected. I'm terribly sorry. If I set up a church that was a racist church, that was for white people only, could I really, in law, protect my ethos and expect my ethos to be protected? No. No, no. So when we hear that this law may require churches to act against their ethos, I say, jolly good. Second, and this one's even more slippery, religiously literate guidance will be needed. Religiously literate guidance will be needed in resolving potentially conflicting claims of discrimination, harassment or victimisation between different protected characteristics. Religiously literate guidance. Such matters should not be left solely to the courts to adjudicate. What's going on in this funny, boring sentence? Religiously literate guidance is saying, I'm afraid people who are not religiously literate, i.e. the secular, i.e. the courts, don't understand that religious homophobia is really deep conviction. And that they don't understand its deep conviction, and so they won't behave accordingly. Well, I say to you that there is no such thing. That actually what flies under the flag of religious conviction is simply homophobia and prejudice. And we must not allow the churches to become safe havens for that sort of disgraceful behaviour. Zero tolerance for homophobia in our churches. I am delighted that the Equality Bill is coming through. I'm delighted that the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, in introducing this legislation, says, "My government is committed to ensuring everyone has a fair chance in life." The Queen, as she started this, "My government will bring forward a bill to promote equality, fight discrimination." Hear, hear. So, this time together today is, I think, incredibly useful. Because what needs to happen and what needs to be said from an ordinary parish priest like myself is, please do not be fooled by any sort of special pleading on behalf of the churches. Homophobia is homophobia, whether it's dressed up to look like religion or not. Thank you very much indeed.